Honorable members, good morning, Justice and your team. Hi. My name is Kindness Paradza. I am an MP for Makonde, and I'm chairing today's session on behalf of Chairman Honorable Dewa. I think you know the rituals. The Bible is there. And if you are going to be joined by your colleagues, commissioners, you'll also take them off.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I believe that what I will do is I'll make a presentation on the issue at hand on behalf of the ZEC, and then my team will join me in fielding questions. So I believe that they should also take the oath. Perhaps I'll start.
Thank you.
I swear and affirm that the evidence that I will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you.
I swear and affirm that the evidence that I will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth. So help me God.
I swear that the evidence that I will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you.
I swear that the evidence that I will give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing else but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you.
I swear that the evidence that I will give is the truth, and nothing else but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. So, can you call it commissioner or call it justice?
I prefer to be called chairperson because I'm here in my capacity as the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission.
Chairperson. Thank you.
Unless you think it might be confusing for you to be chair and for me to be referred as chair as well. With your indulgence, Honorable, I omitted to introduce myself and to introduce the members of my team.
I'm going to that. That's my next year. So I'm just, for the record, this is the Portfolio Committee on Media, ICT, Postal, and Cyber Security. And we have honorable members here who will introduce ourselves first, then we can introduce your team later.
Thank you.
As I said, I'm chairing. My name is Kindness Paradza, and I'm chairing today's session. And these who are flanking me here are committee clerks and secretary. Then the start honorable members from here. They will introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is James Nagadi, Member of Parliament for Makonde.
Good morning. My name is Moto Dan Spanda, Wanda North, South.
My name is Paradzaicha Kona. I am a Member of Parliament for ZEC Central Constituency in Masvingo Province.
Shumani Kiregift, Member of Parliament for Southern Constituency.
I hail from Kwanda Matsa, but legislatively represent the Bebe and Bulawa.
Honorable members.
My name is Sabina Tembani. I'm Member of Parliament for Harare.
I think these are prayers, I think, I'm assuming. Yes, it's now okay.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. My name is Mrs. Justice Priscilla Makanyara Maidate Kumba. I am the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. On my right are fellow commissioners. On my left are members of staff, and I'll allow my fellow commissioners to introduce themselves first.
Thank you. My name is Joyce Letitia Kazembe. I'm the commissioner.
My name is Kubani.
Good morning, honorable members. My name is Ubilis Laibana.
Good morning. My name is Shabi Sotawa, Chief Officer of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission.
Thank Thank you. Well, the chairperson, I think we wrote to you, and I think you have a copy of our letter where we wanted you to come before us and give us a briefing in terms of your policy as ZEC regarding access to the media, the process of accreditation of both journalists, local and foreign. So that is the major thrust of our issue with you today. Then after presentation, we can get some clarifications or questions as well. So over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. This is a presentation on policy issues of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission regarding access to media, ICT, postal and cybersecurity. By way of background information, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission recognizes the media as an important key stakeholder in the management of elections in the country because of its educative and information dissemination roles. The media can improve the quality of elections by objectively informing and educating the public throughout the electoral cycle. It also has the responsibility to provide accurate information to the public about political parties, candidates, and the electoral process to enable voters to make informed choices. Hence, the issue of access to the media becomes an integral component of the electoral process. Media coverage of elections is regulated in terms of Section 160E up to 160K of the Electoral Act. And the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission media coverage of elections regulations 2008, which were promulgated in Statutory Instrument 33 of 2008. Monitoring of the media by the Commission in terms of the current law is permitted during an election period, which period is defined by law as the period between proclamation of an election and the declaration of the results of that poll. It is pertinent from the onset to observe that the law does not clothe ZEC with powers to monitor the media prior to the proclamation of an election. Further, the law also draws a distinction between public and private broadcasters. In terms of the Act, a private broadcaster is a person who operates a broadcasting service for the transmission of television or radio programs to the public, whether the transmission is effected by wireless or other means. On the other hand, a public broadcaster in terms of the law means a broadcaster owned or controlled by the state. The law requires public broadcasters to afford all political parties and independent candidates contesting an election free access to their broadcasting services as prescribed by the regulations which appear pursuant to Section 160G of the Electoral Act. The regulations ensure that there is fair and balanced allocation of time between political parties and independent candidates contesting the election, and that they are all allowed a reasonable opportunity to present their cases to the electorate. The regulations provide detail and procedures as to how certain issues provided in the Electoral Act should be conducted. The regulations expand on issues such as election programs and advertisements to be broadcast, allocation of air time on television and radio election broadcasts, election advertisements, conduct of broadcast, print publishers, presenters and reporters during an election period, records of political matter broadcasted or published, and for appeals. The role of ZEC during such a period is therefore to set up a committee to monitor the Zimbabwean broadcasters and newspapers to ensure that they carry out their obligations and abstain from prohibited conduct. What is prohibited conduct is then set out in terms of Section 160K of the Electoral Act. Public broadcasters are enjoined to afford all those who are contesting the elections free access to their broadcasting services, and that is prescribed by Section 160G. Services are offered on the same terms and conditions and without discrimination to all players involved. This is prescribed by Section 160H of the Electoral Act. However, broadcasters and print publishers are not obliged to publish any advertisement by a political party or independent candidate if it would make them liable either in terms of criminal or civil law. The conduct of news media during an election period. The law enjoins broadcasters and newspapers to ensure the following during an election period, that there is equitable coverage of parties, candidates in extent, timings, and prominence, that all reports are factually accurate, complete, and fair, that they make a clear distinction between factual reporting and editorial coverage, that all inaccuracies are rectified without delay and with due prominence, that they afford each injured or candidate a reasonable right of reply to allegations which are deemed false by the affected party, that they desist from promoting political parties or candidates that encourage violence or hatred against any class of persons, and to ensure that they avoid language which encourages racial, ethnic, or religious prejudice or hatred, or encourages or incites violence, or is likely to lead to undue public contempt towards any political party, candidate, or class of persons. With regards to the Media Monitoring Committee, to monitor the media during this period, the Commission may request the assistance of the Zimbabwe Media Commission and the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe. This committee is required to submit a report on the coverage of election by the media, which is included in the Commission's election report. However, other organizations or institutions are not barred from monitoring or reporting on media coverage of the election. Challenges for the Commission in regulating new media. New media consists of the internet, mobile phones, social media networks such as blogs and microblogs, social networking websites, video sharing sites, and others. In other words, new media is a broad term that describes a range of media that are utilized for many different purposes and should be distinguished from traditional media, which is radio, television, newspapers, and magazines. This new media is often audience created and is more difficult to regulate and to censor. Its authors do not always adhere to journalistic standards and ethics. The internet poses a challenge to traditional views of media conduct in elections. Pre-polling blackouts on campaign coverage, for example, are difficult to police because of unregulated websites and WhatsApp groups. Zimbabwe election laws currently do not have specific provisions to regulate this phenomenon of new media around elections. While the law defines what is and what is not acceptable in terms of campaigning and other media-related activities, this generally speaks to the traditional media with nothing at all on the new media. This is an area that the Media Monitoring Committee is seized with and will be working with other stakeholders to find ways of how these new forms of media can be monitored and regulated during the election period. Accreditation of observers and journalists. The Commission is mandated to establish an accreditation committee to accredit observers each time there is an election, and this is set out in Section 40H of the Electoral Act. Accreditation in general terms is the action or process of officially recognizing someone as having a particular status or being qualified to perform a particular activity. In elections, this status is signified by issuance of a badge or certificate by the Commission to all those who have satisfied the laid down requirements. The functions of accredited observers. An observer is a person or an organization accredited by the Commission to observe an election or a referendum and has the following privileges: to observe election process and in particular the conduct of polling at the election, to be present at the counting and collating of votes cast at the election, and to be present at the verification of polling station returns by the presiding officer. To bring any irregularity or apparent irregularities in the conduct of the poll or the counting or collation of votes to the attention of the Commission, to provide the Commission with a comprehensive review of the election, taking into account all relevant circumstances, including degree of impartiality by the Commission, degree of freedom of political parties to move, assemble, and express their views publicly, opportunity for political parties to have agents observe all aspects of the election process. This is usually done through a report to the Commission after the elections or any electoral activity. There are different categories of observers, starting with foreign observers, who are foreign eminent persons or individuals representing foreign countries or international organizations. The Minister of Foreign Affairs can invite eminent individuals representing foreign countries or organizations. Local observers are eminent persons from within Zimbabwe or individuals representing local organizations. The Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs can invite eminent local individuals or local organizations. The Commission is also allowed in terms of the electoral law to invite sister commissions to observe elections. Accreditation of journalists. This accreditation is available to all representatives of local, national and international media organizations on production of credible identification. The system for accreditation of journalists in elections is one that is conducted jointly by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the media regulatory body, that is the Zimbabwe Media Commission. In general, the Commission takes the view that anyone can have access to the public electoral process and write and broadcast about it as long as one meets the necessary accreditation requirements. With regards to the procedure, when should an application for accreditation reach the Commission? An application for accreditation should reach the Commission not later than the 4th day before the election. This is provided by Section 40I of the Electoral Act. Therefore, any applications for accreditation should reach us 4 days before the election. All applications received after that period will not be processed. To whom is the application made? Applications are made to the Chief Elections Officer through appropriate provincial election officers where observers want to observe the election. The Chief Elections Officer forwards the names to the Accreditation Committee. The Accreditation Committee is required to give due regard to any objections lodged by the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the accreditation of a foreign observer. All recommendations by the committee are to be considered by the Commission 48 hours after submission, and the Chief Elections Officer is notified of all rejections. Foreign and local journalists also follow the same procedures as other observers, save that they are required to produce a valid accreditation card by the Zimbabwe Media Commission in addition to their applications. It is pertinent to note that the Commission has submitted proposals to amend the electoral law, and as such, there could be minor changes to some of the provisions in order to address concerns arising from the previous elections. That is my presentation, Honorable Chair.
All right, thank you so much, Commissioner. The Act talks about the broadcasters only, the public broadcaster. What about the print?
May I ask Ms. Chaurura, she's our legal person, to field that question?
Thank you, Chair. The Act does also talk about the print media.
So in this case, we are talking of Zim papers.
All print media, both public and private.
No, okay. We were trying to get it correctly. Right. You, after proclamation of dates, you now take over. In other words, the running of the media, how media is going to, access for all political parties. Does that include newspapers, the print media?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Private, through cover?
Private and public.
Okay, thank you. Then there is this issue of accreditation of journalists. The local journalists are saying they are accredited already by ZEC, by ZMC. Then you are also going to give them another accreditation and possibly charge them for that. Is that the correct situation?
Could I ask the Acting Chief Elections Officer to field the question, and or Ms. Chaurura, if you'd like to clarify?
The law talks about ZEC accrediting observers. So journalists, when they're coming in as more or less in the same manner that observers are accredited. So what the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission requires is that for us to know that the person is a journalist, the Zimbabwe Media Commission is the one who is issuing out the normal accreditation for journalists. So on production of certification from the Zimbabwe Media Commission, we then issue our own accreditation card, which they can then use to access the various polling stations and constituency collation settings.
Their feeling is that because they are already accredited with ZMC, which is equivalent to you. I don't know that you want the ZEC now to be superior to IPA.
I will field that question, Honourable Chair. What it is that we're saying is that we have our own specific requirements which are set out in terms of the electoral law and regulations. And we may not change those regulations or those electoral laws without the law itself actually being changed. Mm-hmm. So it is not the ZEC which wants this and that from journalists. It is the law which requires that on top of their ordinary registration with their mother body, they also be accredited with us. So my view would be, if this is a grievance from the journalists, then their remedy would be to lobby Parliament to change the law. That is the appropriate response. We have to follow the law. We are bound by it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. On the monitoring, before I open it to my colleagues, on monitoring, you are saying ZMC is part of that monitoring, but right now there is no ZMC to talk about because there are no commissioners. Commissioner, what are you going to do?
Can I ask Commissioner Kazembe to field the question?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairperson and honourable members. We are hoping that by the time we begin our process of monitoring the media, which is after proclamation, the ZMC will be in place. We are hoping, because that is really behind us. The appointing authority should actually make sure that that is in place.
In the event that doesn't happen, what are you going to do? Who is going to monitor?
We will monitor ourselves. Commissioner, we monitor ourselves because it's our task. We cannot escape.
We have the capacity to monitor.
I would say that while the ZMC does not have commissioners, it does exist as a body in terms of the law. And it does have a secretariat that is conducting business on a day-to-day basis, which is why it is accrediting journalists everywhere. And therefore, there is an existing framework that we work with in terms of secretariats. And therefore, whether there is a commission or not before elections, we think that there are sufficient structures for us to interact with the ZMC.
I think we will get to that later. Yes, thank you,
Chairperson. Your presentation is very comprehensive in terms of what you must do and what is expected of you. What do you think about the planning that you're presenting? Do you think it is sufficient for the learning of elections?
As I've said in terms of the report, I did highlight where we have current difficulties, which is the inadequacy of the current laws to deal with social media. But with regards to our traditional forms of media, the law and the regulations are quite clear, they're adequate, they've been used in the past before. Our difficulty really pertains to the monitoring of social media platforms, because there are no laws currently which guide us as to how we should do that.
Maybe the follow-up question, Mr. Chair, is that because the biggest problem we have with social media, because there's no regulation, what do you think as a commission institute to help monitor social media?
Well, as a commission, I don't have to think about what we should do. We're actually in the process of doing something. And what we're in the process of doing is engaging all the relevant stakeholders and actually drafting the relevant terms of reference of how we're going to deal with that. So there is no danger, really. It's work in progress. And by the time we come to the date after the proclamation of the election date, when we actually have to action these things, we will have those policies in place.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. My question is about local journalists who are accredited by ZMC, and then maybe they are not registered with you or accredited by ZEC, and they are going about their duties and they come across an incident which obviously needs coverage. How do you regulate that kind of an incident where a journalist comes across some interesting news and then throws it into his newspaper?
Thank you, Honourable. May I ask Commissioner Moyo to field that question?
Thank you. The accreditation that we give to journalists for purposes of elections enable them to get into our polling stations and where there is actually election business, polling stations, centers for registration, and so on and so forth. That does not mean that any journalist who is moving about their own business and they see any issue to do with elections, they cannot cover it. So we are very specific in terms of what we want, in terms of ability to give them accreditation to enter our polling station, not to exclude them from any coverage of the election to take place later.
So the accreditation is strictly to enter into polling stations, which is just once in the polling day. That's all.
No, on the build up to the election day. You have the election process starts from voter registration. We did accredit them to applicate into the voter registration centers. As we move towards elections, any area that is designated as an area in which we are doing election business is where you accredit them to applicate into. But if they are moving around in public places and they see issues with elections, there is nothing that stops them from covering it. But the idea is to make sure that we have a mechanism that enables organized access to election areas.
May I add a few
sorry, another follow-up. Assuming a journalist comes across an issue that is very pertinent to the electoral process and they want to bring it out and yet they are not accredited, what is your view in regards to that?
Thank you, Honorable Member of Parliament. Yes. I think everybody has a right, really, even ordinary persons, to bring issues, not only journalists. So everybody has a right of access to the commission to bring about issues. Currently, even though we are not yet in the electoral period, as it were, which begins after proclamation, we are engaging journalists. They are not yet accredited with us. We are engaging all journalists that want to come and meet with us. And so they are bringing these issues. In other words, we are informed about what is happening, and they are raising issues. And nothing should really actually stop them from raising issues once they come across certain issues, simply because they are not accredited. Because we have an open door policy where they can come. But with respect then to actually entering polling stations, then they would need accreditation. But really, we are not stopping anybody else who is moving around and engaged in their reporting business to actually note and bring issues to our attention.
Just as a follow-up, does the Act say you must charge them for accreditation?
We are allowed, yes. We are allowed to charge, to raise a fee and to demand a fee from journalists, from anybody who actually is going to be engaged in monitoring whether it's coverage, whether they're going to be entering the processes or the polling stations. Yes, we are allowed to actually, I don't know about demand, we are allowed to charge a fee.
Thank you,
Semantics.
Commissioner. Through you, Mr. Chair, what I would actually like to say is that the fees are actually gazetted in terms of specific statutory instruments. So we don't just pull a figure out of a hat. These are actually prescribed fees. So these fees are prescribed by Parliament. So if Parliament would like to change the fees, waive the fees, if you change the law, we will apply the law. But they are actually prescribed in terms of the law.
Yes, I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, if I heard you properly, you said the role of ZEC is to monitor the electoral process before, during, and after elections. Now, I'm worried about the before, because when I listen to Madam President, she says when the electoral dates are announced, then you come into action. Now, we are looking at fair and balanced opportunity for all parties least 90 days before the election to actually influence the opportunities that are given to various parties to be able to broadcast or to recover their various rallies. You wait for the final, or you actually before you are in existence. When you come into action.
Thank you, Honourable, for that question. I'll field that question partially, then I'll ask Ms. Chaurua to take us maybe briefly through the legal requirements. What I would like the members of this committee, the honourable members, to realise is that the elections are not an event for purposes of our mandate as ZEC. The electoral process is a cycle. So there's the pre-election period, there's the election period, then
because of the role that you play after proclamation, you obviously now take an interest in seeing what is happening in the media, even today. If you look at the media. And if you look at the mainline media, broadcasting, that's what I want to say. And you obviously see what is happening. Do you think our broadcasters, the way they broadcast now, they are geared to be able to comply with what you just represented to this point?
I'll ask Commissioner Moyo to field that question because he's got more experience than I do in what transpired in previous elections.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there's a lot that still needs to be done, especially to ensure that the public broadcaster, especially, is ready for the election process. We are in an environment where the broadcaster, especially the public broadcaster, needs to be inclusive and able to give all players adequate playing field to ensure that there is fairness in coverage of people, manifestos and everything else. So we are working on engaging the public broadcaster, especially to ensure that when the proclamation is made, they'll be able to give adequate space for all the players that are there in the nation.
Just as a follow-up question, in case they don't do that, what are you doing if they don't give the coverage to all and sundry?
Thank you for that question. The sanctions against failure to adhere to what is set out in the law actually appear in the electoral laws themselves. And they provide for complaints. There's a complaints mechanism for complaints to be made to the Commission, and there's a provision that such complaints should be dealt with within a 48-hour period, given the fluid nature of the electoral process. So there are sanctions that can be done. There are censures which are inherent in the Act and regulations, and we will be doing voter education around those sanctions. We'll be doing voter education around those committees. Remember, there's a media monitoring committee, the accreditation committee. So voter education around the functions of those committees, their requirements, we will be rolling that out in the near future.
Thank you very much, very good. Before you other guys came in, I had a follow-up question. when you were doing your presentation, you actually said you accredit journalists after just a proclamation and then after announcement of the results. I thought maybe that was the period where accreditation was actually required. But now I'm also hearing that even during registration of voter period, you also had to accredit journalists. Now, what my problem is, people are registering to vote, and it is really in the interest of the public to know what is happening as people are registering, what constraints are people experiencing and stuff like that. And here you are only accrediting journalists, now giving restriction as to the number of journalists that can have access to the registration centers. Let's give an example of centers in the rural areas where there are limited journalists, and a number of those are freelance journalists who are to operate in the rural areas. So which means most of the problems that were actually occurring in these registration centers were not really brought to light. What is your view in light of that development?
May I ask Commissioner Kazembe to field the question?
It's on my sign language. Thank you, Honorable. I think the chairperson indicated that we did actually credit journalists for the BVR process, because it's a new activity that we embarked on. Remember that registration of voters was undertaken by the then Registrar General of Voters. When we took over the function now, this from last year, when we had the machinery, the biometric voter registration process, so we asked the journalists who wanted to actually observe the process to come, and we actually accredited them, and they'd been moving around all over the country from that period onwards, right up to the mop-up exercise. So they've been observing the process right across the country. So because it's a new, the law still has to be changed. We actually had, I think we had a special, a special, whatever it is called legally, provision to allow us to actually register them for this BVR process, because it wasn't within the law, because we had never used the BVR process, so they were there.
Honourable Member, I'll ask the Acting Chief Elections Officer. I think he wants to add something to what the Commissioner has said with regards to that process.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Members, the beauty and the beast of conducting elections is that they are regulated by law. So that's the beauty aspect of it. And on the other side, you would find that, as Commissioner Kazembe has explained, that and even the Chair has indicated that we registered or accredited journalists during the BVR exercise, which is actually outside the proclamation period, which is outside the election period. That, I think, the Commission saw it in its wisdom to say, in the interest of transparency, even if there is no law that says let us accredit outside the election period, I think in the interest of transparency, the Commission deliberately took that decision to accredit journalists to observe this new activity upon ZEC of registering voters.
Do I take it, Honourable Member, that you feel your question is not being answered because I fear that your question, I listen carefully when I'm asked, I fear that your question is, why do we accredit it all? Why not just declare open season and just allow everyone to come in?
Because this is a public activity.
The answer,
what is happening is you want more people to register to vote, and you want every other problem that is, or constraint that is taking place inside those registration centers to be known by the public and yourselves, so that at least you can address those problems. But I'm saying now, here you are now putting a registration and accreditation condition onto the voter registration, which is a public activity. Why? Because you are interested in the elections. You want to make sure that the observation of elections is done in a transparent and peaceful manner, and you want to restrict people from getting into polling stations and so on. But in terms of voter registration, there is absolutely no need to accredit journalists.
I will answer your question, and I'll answer it very directly so that it can be clear to you. It is also in the interest of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission for its processes to be made transparent to its stakeholders. However, all our processes start and stop and finish with what the law permits us to do. And unfortunately, the law doesn't permit us to declare open season. The law requires us to accredit.
Like for Libya, is there a law to say
If we wish to admit journalists into our, to observe our processes, they cannot be allowed to do that without some form of accreditation. So as the acting chief elections officer has explained to you with regards to the BVR process, the commission used its discretion and decided deliberately as a matter of policy to allow observation of the process. In recognition of the fact that all our processes cannot be observed without accreditation, accreditation was then done.
Okay. You want your work to be known to the public, but then you are trying to curtail the journalists by charging them for them to make sure that your work is known. Right? And secondly, how accessible are you to journalists yourself as the chairperson?
That's an interesting question. I'll allow Commissioner Dr. to field the question on my behalf and to be my protector.
This is for you.
All right. The second part of your question is what I'll take first. Myself personally, as the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, I have an open door policy. And the second thing that I want to say is that we do have stakeholder engagements with the members of the media, and we do them behind closed doors at the ZEC. And we do invite them, we sit down, we talk to them, we discuss topical issues, they bring things to our attention, we express our reservations about some things to them. We actually have very collaborative stakeholder engagements with journalists. So I'm quite accessible. I believe meetings were being held once every 3 months, and we're in the process of drawing up a calendar where we're going to be meeting monthly and then perhaps twice a month once we enter the election period. So we're very much accessible.
Okay. Thank you. The other point you said it was going to be answered by you.
Perhaps if you remind me what the first part of the question was again.
Why are you charging the journalists when they are doing a job to publicize your work?
In short, and to put it succinctly, because that is what the law requires and because we are guided by the law.
In their course. In their course.
Those those journalists who are accredited during the BVR period, are they going to be re-accredited for the electoral period?
Mr. Chairman, do you want to field the question?
Yes.
They will be re-accredited for the election.
And pay again.
The fundraising. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I think I was going to ask about that. I think that is where the problem is. Because BVR is part of the electoral process. And if a person is accredited to monitor the registration of people that are going to participate in the election, why should they be then accredited again to monitor those people that they monitor for? That's number one. Secondly, I'm worried about your capacity, your capacity to monitor the media. The media is a beast. That is why it is called the fourth estate. I cannot sit here and start to believe that a committee of 6 people at ZEC will be able to monitor the media. ZBC alone would need a train of commissioners to monitor it. And that's number two. Number three, I remember in the elections in 1980, for some of us who were voters then in 1980, we were grown up. I remember there was a journalist at the Rhodesia Herald who was barred from covering the elections because of his reportage before in the run-up to the elections in 1980. There are reporters today who, the way they report is such that they are compromised. And we know of reporters at ZBC who are actually going to contest in this election, and they are reporters today. What do you say? Do you do you not think they should be disqualified by virtue of them showing an interest that they want to participate on a particular participation?
Thank you, Honorable. I'll allow Ms. Chahuruva to take the first question on accrediting twice and ZEC being in the fundraising business. Then I'll ask Commissioner Moyo to field the other two questions: capacity to monitor and the possible barring of compromised or allegedly compromised journalists. Ms. Chahuruva.
Thank you, Chairperson. The issue of accreditation fees, as the chair has already indicated, is something that is provided for in the law. It talks about there's a prescription of accreditation fees for even local and foreign observers. So
Don't hide behind the law.
But it is the law.
I was going to say that for the BVR process, the Commission then made a decision to say we will allow journalists to be accredited for them to be able to enter our registration centers and to observe the voter registration processes. The Commission has actually gone further and said we are extending because the accreditation initially, if those who got accreditation cards will recall that the accreditation cards actually were expiring, I think, on the 15th of January when the BVR then would have ended. The Commission then said, okay, mop-up exercise is going to go on until the 8th of February. Accreditation, that same accreditation stands until even after the inspection of the voters' roll.
You want to make it
So-
sound as if you're being charitable. No,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
saying you took a deliberate decision to accredit people for BVR. Why don't you also take a deliberate decision to say the same accreditation then covers the elections?
I was then going to say, I'm part of Secretariat. I was then going to say maybe it's something that the Commission will then consider for
Consider
those
scraping.
for those who have already been accredited
Yes.
for the next processes. But it's not something that I can speak on behalf of.
So what I would like to say to the honourable members of this House is that perhaps, since we have already said we are committed to the idea of continuous stakeholder engagements, if we do get a request to consider this, we will sit as a commission and deliberate on it and come up with a policy decision which is informed by the law, but I'm not shutting that door. Perhaps that is what I'll say in order to conclude this particular debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. This committee,
The chairperson is concluding this debate. I don't think chairperson, with all due respect, you can conclude it because we have not exhausted it. And I don't think the prerogative to conclude it is yours. I will continue to ask a question if after she has closed.
No, it's okay. I also wanted to say we are also, this committee is also a stakeholder. That's why we are raising these issues. Do you see where I'm coming from?
I'm not quite sure what the question is there, Honourable Chairperson.
You said you were going to consult stakeholders, I think, in the region. And I'm saying, this committee, you see, is also a major stakeholder in that. That's why we are raising this issue. To say, can't you scrape these fees for journalists? Because they are actually publicizing your work for free.
It's theirs.
Commissioner Moyo will field that question.
I think
Change the law yourselves.
if I heard my chair correct, she said that we have heard what you have raised with a view of considering in our discussion. It's a policy position that we need to take as a commission. But for now, we take it as a contribution by a stakeholder, which is yourselves as a parliamentary.
Actually, a major stakeholder.
A major stakeholder, as we have just said.
If I may add, if I may add on that, Chair, if I may add, sorry, Chair, Honourable Paroza, you are the lawmakers.
Yes.
Yes. And you take requests from the publics, and media being one of the publics.
Yes.
And it is up to you to consider what is in the best interest of those publics, and you are the ones that make the law. Once you make the law, we will implement it as you make it.
But I think
Yes.
this is an unfair proposition.
No,
Because the law does not, I didn't hear in the presentation,
The
that the law
regulation.
says journalists must be accredited twice for the electoral process. It doesn't say that. The law is very silent on that. The law simply says journalists should be accredited, which is fair enough. And we
The
have
fee.
a problem. we're having a problem with that, but it's fair enough because that's what the law says. But the law does not say you accredit them twice and they must pay twice. It doesn't say that. That is then your prerogative as the commission. It's not the law. And so we made a deliberate policy, and we cannot change something which does not exist. The law exists in that form. Don't ask us to change what does not exist. Thank you. Right. I think we don't talk about the next question.
Okay. Thank you. Can I, before you respond, can I? Yes.
Yes.
You wanted to say something?
I just wanted a clarification. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I understand where we are talking about double charges for journalists who have been, I would say at the discretion of the commission, have been charged for BVR, which is not in the law. Then we are requesting that once they are charged for BVR, then they should not be charged for the next stage. I think that's what I understood. Then I think there's also another question from the chairman that you actually want all the charges scrapped. Is that so? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So which one has the commission considered? Have they considered the double paying or the scrapping altogether?
And Force said they are going to look into it and come back to us. Commissioner, Chairperson, I think that's what you said.
Yes, you heard me correctly. There are two outstanding questions which Commissioner Moyo seized with.
Yeah, there was a question on the size of the media monitoring committee of the commission and its capacity to monitor the media. I do agree with you, that we need more people involved in that monitoring process. There are provisions for us to invite some stakeholders to sit in our committee, and we are making considerations of some stakeholders, in particular Zimbabwe journalists or MISA or one of those institutions that we think are bodies that are involved in monitoring of the media. We have not made a decision on which one we invite. We are still having conversations, but we certainly want to involve other key stakeholders in the process of monitoring. The commission is made up of 9 people, and the numbers of people that are supposed to sit in the media committee are defined. I think they're supposed to be 3 commissioners. So that's why we are also going to invite most of them.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, that one has not been answered. The one on journalists that are compromised.
Yes, it's very difficult to really make a conclusion regarding journalists that are interested in contesting elections on a particular day until they have registered during the election. Before the election time, there are so many people that would show interest, or people can just speculate, and we cannot really use that as a basis for disqualification if we are not powers to do so. All we can do is that after the period of nomination, and it is clear that so and so is waiting for a public broadcaster has been nominated by this party, it then becomes easy for us to begin to address what we're saying.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, your presentation encourages new media. I said current law does not regulate on how ZEC can actually monitor. We, as legislators, are aware that the IT ministry is working on cybercrime, bill, which also covers the issue of the new media. Now, as ZEC, do you have a budget? Do we have an IT department which is ready to handle how the new media is actually operating? Or, in the absence of a budget, we will be forced to seek assistance assistance from other security agencies in government. We have the capacity to put in the work to handle the movement.
May I ask the Acting Chief Elections Officer to field the question?
Thank you, Chair. Let me respond to the last part of the question. Yes, we have an IT department in the commission, but in terms of the budget, I want to believe that this question is in relation to the new media and the subsequent regulations that you seem to be pointing that the Ministry of ICT is working on. And I think it will then be from whatever is coming out from that ministry that would assist the Commission on how then to go about monitoring this new media, which is social media.
I'm not saying IT department in terms of BVR, I'm talking in terms of monitoring.
In terms of an IT specifically, you mean IT, Honorable, specifically to monitor this new media? Not really existing as an entity, because as the Chair said and as the word said, this new media which has never been regulated anyway in Zimbabwe. But we have within the Commission a Department of IT, which then within the wisdom of the Commission, then the Commission can see how it can then assign this department to deal with the issues that are emanating from the new media.
If I could add on to the answer, basically what you are asking us is whether we have put in provisions in anticipation of regulations that are not yet in place. And the simple answer is no. When the regulations are in place, they will then stipulate what it is very specifically that we need to be geared for, and we have the capacity to put that in place.
Okay, there is this talk about electoral reforms. What are they?
Thank you, Honourable Chair, for that question. There is currently in Parliament a proposed electoral amendment bill which has been moved by the Ministry or the Minister of Justice. And what we have done as the ZEC in terms of our mandate, we have made certain recommendations to that minister for certain changes in the electoral law that we would like to see, particularly before the 28 elections. And all our proposed amendments have been incorporated in the bill. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a second reading of that bill in Parliament this week. And I would actually be interested in having you, Honourable Chair, as a Member of Parliament, perhaps advise me if all our amendments made it through the bill, because I didn't sit through the debate that was in Parliament. We're actually waiting to be advised whether all our recommendations were adopted by yourselves.
Thank you. Are your recommendations, do they cover what civil society out there says we need electoral reforms? Did you capture that? That's what I'm talking about. What do they mean by electoral reforms? And you said you've sent your recommendation. Did they capture what the civil society said?
To answer your question quite specifically, we had made about 5 or so recommendations, and I will ask Ms. Chaurua to speak to them specifically and individually if that is what you would like. However, I want to say that civil society organizations are one of our stakeholders, but our proposed amendments were mainly towards those sections of the Electoral Act that at present affect our administrative preparations for the elections. Civil society organizations, I don't speak for them, but I do believe that they did make their own representations to the minister. Our own specific proposed amendments were to do with our administrative issues, because as you know, our main mandate is to administer the elections. Ms. Chaurua.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think one of the major amendments that we pushed through to the Minister of Justice's the alignment of issues around the registration processes, as it were. And what had happened previously, which allowed us to then go through with the biometric voter registration, was that the President had issued the presidential amendment uses powers to visit regulations which amended that expiry of that statutory instrument. Then those proposals were then pushed to the electoral amendment bill, which is currently before Parliament. Then there were also provisions that deal with how the biometric voter registration process itself would then be conducted, the deduplication processes would be conducted, because what is currently in the law speaks to what was happening during the registration that was done by the civil registry. So we wanted amendments to aspects of how the deduplication process would be done. And then there were amendments to do with our assisted voters, especially the blind voters could be assisted. Currently the law says a blind voter can be assisted by a person of their own choice, but in the presence of a presiding officer. And we have received representations against that, and we made the proposal to the minister that should be amended to allow the person who is blind to be able to be assisted by a person of their own choice in the absence of the presiding officer and other officials in the polling station. So those are some of
if I could add a few more of our proposed amendments. We had proposed amendments surrounding the issue of polling stations. You might have taken note of the fact that with the advent of this new biometric voter registration, our polling stations or voting has now become ward-based and polling station-based. So basically, as ZEC, we had taken a policy to say that we don't want to register more than 1,000 voters per polling station, because that is, if there are more than 1,000, there might not be enough time for them to vote in between those stipulated hours. So we have sought an amendment to the current Electoral Act, which allows us to actually put more polling stations. The other amendment had to do with the date by which a prospective candidate could pull out of the political race, because that affects our ability to print our ballot papers on time, and that is actually, we wanted an amendment that would make it cost effective to say, if you have indicated and been accepted by the nomination court and your name appears on the ballot paper, there's a certain cut-off date that we've recommended to say you can't pull out. Because the law says if a candidate pulls out, we have to reprint the ballot paper. So those were some of the proposed amendments that we made, which, as I've said, most of our amendments were towards our administrative processes to make our processes more efficient and to take into account the changes in the new constitution, which have had a domino effect on our administrative processes.
Yeah, because why I raised that question is that a number of political parties are saying if there are no reforms, then we're not going to participate in the election. So that's why I'm saying, did you capture that in the amendment so that they can participate?
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. The first thing that I want to say, it is not the responsibility of ZEC alone to cause changes in the law. In fact, it is politicians themselves who should originate these bills and propose changes in the law. That is the role of Parliament. So what we have done, and I'll repeat this, we have recommended those changes which will assist us to make our administration of the poll more efficient and to bring it in line with the new constitution. We fully expect politicians, civil society organizations to themselves make recommendations to Parliament. They're also citizens of Zimbabwe. They can participate in parliamentary processes which bring about changes in the law. That is our view. We cannot do everything as the ZEC. Our mandate is to make recommendations. We took the policy position that our recommendations had to do with our administrative processes, and we left the rest to the other Zimbabweans to also play their role. So political parties want changes in the electoral law. They are in Parliament. They are better placed than us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, you might have covered it, so I came in a bit late, but there was the issue
topical issue about military being involved in the ZEC process that
No, we didn't discuss that. You can ask.
Yeah, can she just clarify what is the position? We have serving soldiers or people in the military still running in your offices, running elections, and concurrently serving as soldiers.
And it just says, in addition to that, is that have you been seconded to ZEC yourself or have you resigned from that? There are issues of people doing 3 jobs at a time.
Thank you for those 2 questions, honourable members. I will answer the questions, but before I do, might I remind this gathering that we were specifically invited to come before you to make a presentation on the policy issues regarding access to media, ICT, postal, and cyber security. The last 2 questions, in my respectful view, with all due respect, honourable members, fall outside the purview of what we were asked to come and address you on. Having said that, and in the interest of transparency, I will answer those questions. With regards to militarization or the alleged militarization of ZEC, I have previously gone on record and clarified that position to say we do not have any serving members of the military, the CIO, prisons, or any other perceived security personnel. We do not have serving members. I have taken the trouble to reassure myself, and I did put a certain percentage into the public arena to say whichever members of previous members of the security sector which are in our books are less than 15%. So this perception that ZEC is heavily manned by security sector personnel is actually a misconception. With regards to whether or not I have resigned from the Judicial Service Commission, if you take a look at the Constitution, you will realize that the Judicial Service Commission is my employer. And I took an oath of office to be a judge in 2011. So to answer your question directly, no, I have not resigned from the Judicial Service Commission for the simple reason that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and what the Constitution sets out in terms of that commission has my services for a specific period of 6 years, whereafter I fully expect to go back to the High Court bench as a judge and resume my duties. At the moment, I am no longer sitting on the High Court bench, but I remain a High Court judge.
Thank you. Honourable members, just to wind up there.
Yeah, mine was basically a follow-up to the amendment to the Electoral Act. While it's not part of your mandate as of today, what I just wanted you to do is maybe just a brief procedure of how the amendment can be done in terms of these political parties. In fact, all the political parties say we want changes to the Electoral Act so that we can participate in the elections for free, fair, and credible elections. What could be the correct procedure? Because the media is the one that is awash with changes to the Electoral Act or amendments. So what is the procedure? Instead of us just making noise in the background, like you said, we are the politicians. Is in Parliament so that we sit in Parliament. The motion is moved, and then we advocate for changes in the Electoral Act so that we get free, fair, and credible election. What could be in your short brief the correct procedure?
Thank you very much for that intervention. I will say, Honourable Minister, because Honourable Member of Parliament, because you asked a very pertinent question and then you answered it. You asked the question, then you answered it.
Yeah.
So there's nothing for me to add.
Before you close, Chairman, just for interesting sake, since they are here, what happens if someone loses his or her voting slip?
Thank you for that, Honourable. The voter registration slip is a mere indication that you are registered to vote. You really don't need it for any other process after that. You will not need it on polling day. You will not be asked to produce it on polling day. Remember, your biometric features have already been captured. They are already in the computer. On polling day, all you have to do is to produce and provide a valid ID. So if you lose it, don't worry. You've washed it in your clothes at home, or you've misplaced it, you don't know where it is. You don't need it for any other process after that. We will go through a phase where we lay open the provisional voters roll for inspection. So all you need to do is to remember to go and check that you're actually registered to vote, to check where your specific polling station is, because remember, if you are in Mutare and your polling station is in Wedza, you will not be able to vote from Mutare. You have to specifically go to Wedza. And if in your ward there are 10 polling stations, you will only be able to vote at one polling station. So that's all you need to remember, to check that you're actually registered, to check that you know your polling station so that you present yourself there on polling day.
Before you
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up on that. There are instances where a member has corrected his name, but come polling day, the details are still wrong. What remedies are there? Maybe any of this corrected, you check everything is in place, you inspect it. But on the polling day, your name does not appear, or it appears at another different polling station. What remedies are there?
I'll ask the Acting Chief Elections Officer, Mr. Slagwana, to field that question.
Thank you, Honourable. It is a question that does not have a direct answer, but I think the key point is the point that was raised by the ZEC chairperson, that there is need for every citizen who is registered to vote to go and inspect. And once the inspection, because the inspection will assist not only the voter, but it will also assist the commission to make the corrections. The purpose of inspection is really is some kind of an audit to say, yes, this person is registered, I am registered here, my details are correct. If they are not correct, it is upon the commission to do that correction. So the commission will take all its effort to make sure that those corrections are effected. But in the event, as the Honourable Member said, that your name then is not there on the voters' roll, unfortunately a person who is not on the voters' roll cannot vote, but it is the Commission's undertaking that it will do its best to make sure that everybody who is registered and appears on the roll.
Thank you, Honourable Makani, so that we close.
Commission Chairperson, the presentation that you made there, full realization of it depends on funding. It might be outside the purview of what you've invited to speak on, but how adequate are you funded? Because it will remain a high dream or high in the sky. We will talk about all those things without adequate funding. That's number one. Secondly, I hear that it might also fall outside the purview of what you're supposed to hear. I hear you referring to Mr. Slagwana as acting chief election officer. Is that correct? For a process like this one, what would is not preferable? When people with substantive positions, was that we don't want a person who is not able to make a decision on account of the fact that they are only acting. How soon do you think you could get substantive people in this position so that we know we are ready to go? Thank you.
With regards to the question on adequate funding, I have gone on record to say that we did present a budget of $148 million to Parliament, and Treasury has committed to providing us with $95 million of that. So quite clearly, we are in the process of continuously engaging with Treasury, and we do have other traditional funding partners such as UNDP and IFES who may come on board and actually assist us with some of our funding deficits. But it is on record that we did not get all the money that we budgeted for. So quite clearly your remarks on that are quite pertinent, although we are optimistic. Regarding the question of whether or not we're able to go into elections with an acting chief elections officer, my categorical assurance is that indeed we are, because Mr. Slagwana has actually acted as our chief elections officer before, And as to the reasons why he's now our acting chief elections officer, those are internal processes of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Suffices to say the reason why he's acting and not substantive is that we have to advertise for that post and actually recruit and open up the recruitment to other members. So that is the reason why he has to act until such time as administratively we're able to do that. He's well capacitated, he's been with the ZEC for over 20 years, he knows all our internal processes, and that is all I will say on that subject.
It's more the reason I'm asking why he should remain acting for the past 20 years. I mean,
No, it's not 20 years.
He has not been acting for 20 years.
no, it's a figure of speech. It's a figure of speech.
No, just to correct it, because before you know it, it will be in the newspaper tomorrow.
You must know it's a figure of speech. He has been acting for a long time, and if he has capacity, he must then be substantive so that we substantive.
He has not been acting chief elections officer for a long time. He has been acting chief elections officer for 7 days. I said he has served as acting chief elections officer in a previous period in the past.
Yeah, that's why I'm worried.
For this immediate period, he has only been acting for 7 days.
Thank you, honorable members. Any last question? Last.
Yeah?
Yeah. Last question. Yes. Thank you. Last question. I want to prepare this ZEC for the coming elections. The news.
I've got incidents in my constituency where a person registered to vote, and then they collected their slips and they went home. Later on, they checked the polling station is in Urumbe, they are in Zaki. What is the remedy they can actually do in order to correct that anomaly? And then in a situation where a person transfers, they've registered to vote in Harare, and then their job requires that they are transferred to Kariba tomorrow and for the next maybe foreseeable future. And what do they do in order to transfer their polling station from the current to the new station where they are going? Is there that provision, and how can people access that?
Thank you, Honourable, for that question. It actually gives us an opportunity to clarify our processes. When we produce a provisional voters roll, it is provisional for the reason that the law takes into account that there might be those corrections regarding transfers, regarding some people might have died, some people might have married and wish to change their names from their maiden name to their married names. So the remedy really is during that period when the voter's roll is lying open for inspection, you simply present yourself with your new proof of residence details, and that address will simply be changed, and then you'll be reassigned a polling station to wherever it is that you currently find yourself. Which is why I was saying it's very important for our voters to know that that period when the provisional voters roll is lying open for inspection is a very crucial period, because you really have to check that all your details are correct. You really have to check, you do your transfers, you do the change of names. We'll be trying to see whether between the date when we registered our voters and the prospective polling day, we will be trying to remove those people who will have died in the interim. So that is why it's a provisional roll. It is subject to correction. Anything and everything can be corrected at that stage. It is only once the final voters roll has been printed and gazetted that we then have difficulty, because we are then bound by what has been gazetted. So it's very important to check during that period. The question on whether or not ZEC is how well prepared we are for the elections. The question is very broad, and if I were to take it technically, I would probably give you a blow-by-blow account of all our processes and what we're doing, and I don't think that is your intention. I think your intention was for us to indicate generally whether we're well prepared for the elections. We're very well prepared for the elections. We have mapped out all our processes. We have budgeted for all our processes. We know where we are. We know where we're supposed to be going, and we would like to assure this committee that our preparations are well on course and well on board, except perhaps for the sticky issue of the budget deficit, which I am optimistic will be addressed shortly.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Justice. And can we have a copy of your presentation? Thank you very much for coming, you and your team. At least we've been able to clarify those issues, and I'm sure we are satisfied. So thank you very much. We meet sometime we'll meet on the following days.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, and thank you for inviting us. We welcome the opportunity to disseminate information about our processes.
Thank you.